again. My name is Charlene Najir. I'm one of the co-founders of the Green Heart Movement, which is one of the organizations hosting this event today, along with Red Thread. Romola Lucas is the other co-founder. So I welcome you all from wherever you're joining us on this Green Groundings today, which is World Environment Day. Of course, every day is World Environment Day. The slogan for this particular day is Generation Restoration. And the idea is to make peace with the land. But what does it mean, though, when we humans cannot make peace among ourselves? Right now, we're witnessing a genocide occurring in real time. The murder and mutilation of thousands of innocent people, including newborn babies and entire generations of families, destruction of hospitals, schools, and other infrastructure necessary for life, and the mass displacement of people from their homelands. That's humans killing other humans right before our eyes. It's clear for all of us to see. Something else is also happening right now, though, something a little bit less obvious, but just as real. And that's the fact that we're in the middle of a mass extinction, which is the dying off of a huge amount of other life forms on Earth. Plants, animals, bacteria, fungi. Some scientists say that up to 15% of all known species have been lost in the last 500 years. Something that would otherwise have taken 18,000 years, we humans have caused in just the last 500 years. There have been other mass extinction events, 5 before. Actually, the last one is the one that killed all the dinosaurs. But the difference is that this one that's occurring right now is one that is being caused completely by humans and human activity. No asteroids falling from the sky. And once the entire family of a life form is wiped out, there's no restoring it. Our goal then has to be to stop the death and destruction before it's too late, especially for our human species. Take the next slide, please. We big brain humans like to think that we're at the top of the food chain, right? That we're more powerful and better than everything else. But the fact is that we humans cannot survive one day by ourselves. Everything is connected, and that means we all need each other. Every bacteria, every plant, every animal, every insect, every fish, every snail, everything has a role to play in the web of life. And when one part is damaged or destroyed, the entire thing will be. So what must be restored then? Well, the real work of generation restoration is connection with each other, with the land, and with all the beings that share this one planet. And what must also be restored is balance and harmony, a way of living harmonious with other living things, with the environment, which is the land, the air, the water, everything around it is the environment. So if you're thinking that this seems like an impossible task, I want you to remember Quamina, the African man who this street is named for, who was one of the leaders of the Demerara Revolt of 1823, in which over 10,000 enslaved persons rose up to demand their rights. Let's remember also the incredible resilience of the indigenous people, who were the first people of this land, who are still here and still resisting and safeguarding the natural world, in spite of all the genocide that their ancestors did. Let us also remember the bravery of our ancestors who crossed the Kalipani, not knowing what awaited them on the other side of the world, but who also endured. So these were our ancestors. They faced great suffering, but the fact that we are still here today, still standing, is evidence that struggle is never in vain. As we look back and remember our ancestors, we must also look forward and ask ourselves, what kind of ancestors do we want to be? And what kind of ancestors we will be for the generations now coming up behind us? Because just like the decisions our foreparents made to resist, to maintain their culture, to stand against oppression, so too will the decisions we make now affect the future of the children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Next slide, please. Guyana just celebrated our 58th independence, right? Last month. But you'll be forgiven sometimes if you look around the state of affairs and ask if we're actually independent. Because it seems as if we still have masters and we're still shackled, even though chains may not be obvious or made of iron. It seems as if outsiders are still calling the shots, pulling the strings behind the scenes. It's in this context that we meet here today, this world environment day. So I'll end with my remarks with a quote from another great Guyanese, Walter Rodney, whose assassination occurred 24 years ago this month, right? So June 13th, but whose teachings and words remain to inspire us and motivate us. He said, it's only direct action on the part of the people, your own perception of what is possible that can produce change. So this discussion today is a continuation of something that Walter Rodney did called Groundings, where he, an academic, a professor, a historian, left the university grounds and went into communities to share knowledge, to gather, to ground regular people, to discuss issues, and to brainstorm how to solve them together. So that's what we're here to do today. I welcome you all. So just a bit of housekeeping before we move on to the panel discussion. Restrooms are through this door. If you've never been here before, please mute your phones, and folks on Zoom, please stay muted until you're asked to speak. Put any questions or comments in the chat in Zoom. We will hopefully have enough time to get to that. And of course, there'll be time for that in person as well. For folks on Zoom, I mean, I'm sorry I have to say this, but if there's any abusive or disrespectful content, that you know now that you're going to be removed from the Zoom. Hopefully that doesn't happen. Of course, also self-care. If you need to pause, take a break, go outside, get some fresh air, drink water, do what you need to do to take care of yourself. So the program, so we will have, we have 4 speakers. 3 are not here with us right now. 1 is here, so we'll have a mix of Zoom and in person. So I will move on to the panel discussion. Dr. Vincent Adams is our first speaker, and I don't think I need to do a whole lot of introduction for him. Former Lindoner, born and raised, former head of the EPA, and an environmental engineer. And so, as you might have noticed, the theme of our discussion is about oil spills and it's education for action. So we have an esteemed panel of speakers, but I'm going to task you and them as we listen to what they have to say to think about what action can be taken. So Dr. Adam, I will pass the mic metaphorically over to you and ask you to speak about, you're the first speaker, so you're setting us up about letting us know from your knowledge how likely is an oil spill based on what you know about how Exxon and its partners are operating in Guyana right now.
Thanks, Charlene, and welcome to all of our wonderful listeners online and in Guyana. Of course, I envy you folks in Guyana. Probably rather be there than here, but nevertheless, so welcome to everybody, and thanks to the sponsors of this most important session. Also, I wanna focus on safety, and I think that's what the gist of this entire session is about. You asked a question about how likely, for example, what's the likelihood of a spill occurring? Well, there are 5 doctrines that we normally use when we talk about safety. The first doctrine is safety is a culture, meaning, we mentioned today's environmental day, every day is environmental day, every day is a safety day. And a lot of people, for the most part, if you're not a safety person, or you're just an engineer or a technician or an IT type of person, a lot of folks, especially major companies, including major companies, they look at safety as some side thing it's very stressful for them to participate in such program to prevent an incident of occurring. But safety, yeah, like I said, it's a culture, is what you do when people are not looking. And the only time you realize how important safety is when something happens and your operation is shut down, and the consequences are very, very dire indeed in many cases, and could very well be in our operations offshore. Another important doctrine is all accidents are preventable. Every single accident. I've been in this business for going on probably 50 years, and I've never seen, and I've been on both sides as an operator and investigator. I've never seen an accident where it was not avoidable, unless it's by by the hands of God or something. So all accidents, if nothing else, we almost leave here with that doctrine that all accidents are avoidable. Everyone, every single person who's in an operation is responsible for safety, from the highest level to the lowest level. But the most important doctrine that we all must leave here with, that production, profit, and politics must never, never be taken as a priority over safety. Never, ever. As a matter of fact, we're in my last occupation for the U.S. government, you could be fired if you're caught or found guilty of putting production or profit above safety. Every operation, or as a matter of fact, everything that you do in life has a risk. And I think a lot of times, I hear a lot of times people get risk mixed up with probability, with the likelihood of occurrence. Risk is equal to, in terms of the mathematical jargon or the arithmetic jargon, risk is equal to the probability of occurrence multiplied by the consequence. So you hear all the time, well, the risk of something occurring is very low. No, it's the probability may be very low. But if you multiply the probability, which may be very low, maybe 1% or 10% or a very low number, you multiply that low number by a very large number, which could be the consequence. The risk is very high. So that's how we calculate. We don't just look at the probability of occurrence. We look at the probability multiplied by the consequences. For example, the consequence of the spill, that oil spill in the Mkanda oil spill, is running close to $150 billion. So if you multiply 150 by whatever that was, whatever the probability of occurrence, is still a large number. If you look at the Piper Alpha spill, going way back in the late 80s, I think, in the North Sea, 169 lives were lost on that drill rig in the North Sea. 169 lives were lost. I don't know how you evaluate how you evaluate the value of lives. So that's the consequence. So even though the probability of occurrence was low, the consequences was very high. So risk, again, is the probability multiplied by the consequence. So it doesn't matter how low the probability is. Now, every operation, like I said, has a risk, which must be identified, and it must be mitigated as much as possible and prepared for the worst case scenario. Like I said, everything has a risk, and it must be mitigated. Engineering, I don't think there's anything that in these, that technology and engineering cannot accomplish, except, of course, you have to look at the economics of it, and the cost, and what benefits do you get after a certain time. But everything has to be within those engineering parameters. When these things are engineered, they're designed to be safe. As long as you follow the right protocol, as long as it's competently designed, they're designed to be safe. So when you operate, you must operate within those design parameters to obtain a safe operation. And there are a couple of controls that you put in place to make sure that a safety incident does not occur. Like in our case, you must have one competent oversight. I remember where I used to work in United States government, we used to always make sure that we have enough horsepower, meaning competency on our side, even though it's the government side, than the contractors have. No, because you don't want to be intimidated. We want to have to for them to look at us and to respect the directions that we give to make sure that we have competency. But two, the design parameters are enshrined in the EIA, the Environmental Impact Assessment. And if there's one thing that I want to stress here today, is the environmental impact assessment. It's the most important document on any hazardous operation. We call it the Bible in the business. And there's a reason why an EIA takes sometimes years. I know EIA that has taken 3 years to be completed because it's the only document that documents all of the design parameters with basis, with sound engineering basis. And when an EIA says that a safety limit is this amount or this number, you must not ever exceed. It is sacred. It's the most sacred document in any operation. As a matter of fact, the act, our EPA Act, the EPA Act says that you must have an EIA on any hazardous facility. Of course, you go through a process to make that determination. It may not necessarily be an EIA after the hazard assessment, but in certain operations, such as the offshore production, you must have an EIA. One of the most troubling things is that we have now gotten into the practice in Guyana of waiving EIAs. We waived the EIA on the bridge crossing the Demerara River. And I remember when the EPA itself advertised in the newspapers going through the process that there will be an EIA, the politicians came in right after that and reneged on that and removed it and said, well, no, overruled the technical folks of the EPA, saying that we do not need an EIA. That bridge where you've got to cut down mangroves and the construction, the noise and everything else within the waterways, the issues with the environmental issues within the waterways, you've got to take all that into consideration. However, the politicians came in and canceled it without even, and based on information that I received, just overruled the EPA technical folks and went ahead without an EIA. The most hazardous facility probably that we have ever had in Guyana, which is that gas to shore energy facility, the gas plant. They waived an EIA. It's the most egregious decision that I've ever seen. And then you have the EPA director who in a public meeting stood up there and said that to do an EIA for that gas plant would mean that you have to do an EIA for every single motor car that you drive around Georgetown with. Go back, it's on video. But that is the kind of thing, when you in these type of decisions, it's just as if, remember I mentioned earlier that people take safety as just a side thing, and we do not understand the importance and an EIA. It informs the environmental permits. So when you finish with that information in that EIA, to put the information, and that's what you put into your in our specific case, the EIA says that the operations offshore in Liza 1, for example, but it's occurring in all of the other, that thou shalt, if exact words, of LISA 1, it's 120 day. As a matter of fact, they're not even what you normally do in order not to even get to that safety limit, you make sure you cut back, and we normally use like 20%. So also in that EIA, it says that the operating limit shall be 100,000 barrels per day. Do you know what the LISA 1 is operating at? 163,000 barrels per day. The safety limit is 120. The operating limit, which is the conservative limit, so you don't get to the 120, it's 100. We are operating at 163,000 barrels per day. And then you hear this nonsense about debottlenecking and this, just to kerfuffle and confuse people because they take advantage of the fact that this is new to us and we do not understand, these type of lingo, etc. The permit in itself, the permit says in every single permit, it says that the operation must comply with the EIA.
Yeah.
So here today, folks, listen to this. Today we have an EIA that says the safe operating limit has to be, they cannot exceed 120,000 barrels per day. We went willy-nilly and are operating now at 163,000 barrels per day. So in effect, the EIA doesn't matter. That's what we have. The EIA still maintains it's 120,000 barrels per day. We are operating at 163,000 barrels per day. And remember what I said up front in terms of the doctrine. You never, ever compromise production and profit for safety. And that's exactly what we're doing. In other places, whoever is making those decisions will be fired immediately. Not even considering the danger to the entire nation, not only to Guyana, but to the entire Caribbean. So what we're doing, we're enhancing the probability of a spill. You remember I told you about that probability, so we're increasing the probability of a spill. Sorry? Okay. Even the Exxon representative, I remember when the Exxon, when they were socializing the EIA for the gas pipeline on West Demerara, they themselves said several times the EIA, they said almost the same language that I said. They said the EIA has to be followed. It is sacred. But yet, in practice, and the government, and this has nothing to do with politics, because as folks know me, I criticize, even when I was working for the U.S. for the Guyana government, I was probably the biggest critic in public. So this has nothing to do with politics. But here we are, Exxon are all the operators. They're in the business to make a profit. They're taking care of their interests, their bottom line. They're going to try to get away with as much as possible to make as much money as possible. We, as the government, has to play our role to protect our interests. And it's sad to say that that's not what is happening now, and Exxon is taking advantage of that situation. Now, like I mentioned before, you must have competent oversight. And one of the things that we had set up at the EPA when I was there, initially we did not have a single engineer. All of our environmental folks did not have science in their background. The University of Guyana had a degree. It's called environmental studies. These were very bright folks. So what we did, I was even working with the University of Guyana to make sure that they institute a program with more science, because you cannot be at the EPA. The EPA is a science-based organization. You have to have science in engineering. So, but we had like over 40 folks who had graduated from UG with an environmental studies program. So in terms of competency, we did not have that competency. We did not have, and still do not have, a single person at the EPA with even 1 hour of petroleum engineering or petroleum science training. So when I hear the vice president up to recently said that he's got advice from the exports at the EPA to direct that the production rate be increased from 120 barrels per day to 163,000 barrels per day, it's laughable. There's nobody at the EPA who has a single, and this is no exaggeration, that has a single hour of training in petroleum engineering, petroleum science. And that was one of the things that when I was there at the EPA, the first, our highest priority was to make sure that that was taken care of. We went to the World Bank. The World Bank brought in an export. They sponsored the program. Well, not a program. They gave us a $1 million, brought in an export from Mexico. For several months, we sat there, developed a petroleum unit within the EPA with a 36-member unit that had an organization chart, and every single, you had to be a highly qualified, lots of experience. You had to have your petroleum engineering degree, geological engineering degree, safety engineering degree, with at least 5 to 10 years experience. The document was there, the World Bank document, and the whole objective of that was to have folks on board the ship. Don't listen to this nonsense about satellite. You cannot see inside a ship when you're looking for what is happening on board the ship. You have to see what is going on to prevent an accident. You have to be on board to look at are the meters running correctly? Are the valves operating properly? Are they following procedures? Because all of the accidents in the oil and gas industry, the Macondo spill, the Piper Alpha spill, it happened because people were not following procedures, and it's about profit and it's about greed, and that is what we're having there. In addition to that, to the World Bank program that we set up, we instituted a study leave policy where all employees were afforded the opportunity to go apply to university. You get, as long as it's something that is applicable to the EPA, you get admitted to the university. We're going to sponsor you, but then you have to give us 5 years of service. So of course I was only there for 22 months. So when staff went out and applied, they got admitted. When I left, they came back to management and said, well, we've been accepted at these universities. Is this program still on? Do you know what they said? They said, first of all, that I was doing something that was illegal, which is absolute nonsense. And secondly, that I wanted to turn the EPA into a university. Here we are trying to build capacity, and they're saying I wanted to turn the EPA into, but that's the small-mindedness that we. The human factor, though, I talked about the work, as long as you have you can pay the cost of it. But the human factor is the one thing you cannot engineer. The human factor. You never know what a guy or a lady is going to do the night before they report for duty in the morning. Look, the Exxon Valdez spill. It was the captain was accused of being intoxicated when that ship ran aground. You also must have a very good oil response plan, because you've got to prepare for the worst. Like I said, you could engineer anything, but you never know the human behavior. At any moment, anything can happen because of the state of the mine at the time. So you must be prepared if something happens, like an oil spill plan. The oil spill plan is totally inadequate. As a matter of fact, when I was at EPA, it was prepared by the CDC. We refused to sign that plan. We refused to sign that plan. It was so inadequate. The capping stock that I saw in the newspapers that is coming to Guyana, we had negotiated that. Now the capping stock, what it is, it's a lid for a big heavy lid, about 50 to 100,000 tons that you put 50 to 100 tons that you put on top of the well when it's flowing, It's a lid to stop it from flowing. So the objective is to get it there as soon as possible. Myself and Dr. Bino, who was in charge of the Department of Energy, we demanded that that be at 3 days. You must get it there in 3 days. So it was coming out of Trinidad because we couldn't do that out of Guyana. So we said, okay, Southern Trinidad, you're going to get it there in 3 days. All was agreed. What has happened here now, when you hear that it's coming to Guyana, do you know they've changed that 3 days to what? They've tripled that 3 days now, allowing them that time frame of 9 days to get it there. So there's an extra 6 days of flow into the ocean. And then of course in terms of if something happens, how do you cover the cost? And of course, Melinda is going to cover later the whole issue of the parent company guarantee that we implemented. So Melinda is going to cover that part. So and I'm going to the rest for questions.
If I could stop you here right now, Dr. Adams, this is a lot of very good information. I know you could speak for the entire 2 hours, but this is a good point for us to hear from our Trinbagonian panelist, who is going to speak. This is a very good segue. So I want to give the mic over to Gary Aboud next, who is one of the founding members of and currently serves as Corporate Secretary of Fishermen and Friends of the Sea. FFOS's main objective is to promote sustainable development, urbanized environmental management, accountability, inclusion, transparency, and community empowerment throughout the Caribbean. And Gary and FFOS has had a lot of experience over the last. So, Gary, I give you the floor now.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Well, I wanted to thank Mr. Adams for his presentation. Very disturbing. Today is a day we should be celebrating something. But we find it very difficult. We're searching for what we could celebrate, but I could celebrate Dr. Adams, I could say, or is it Professor Adams? I could celebrate his presentation because I learned a lot and our experiences reflective. I'd like to comment on a couple of things on his presentation, not to contradict, but to endorse and support. The first thing is that the safety comes at a cost. And like he says, cost is not a critical concern when one is chasing after profit. And the large corporations, the extractors, earning billions of dollars, and their shareholders are more interested in benefit, financial benefit. So our position has always been, it's good that you should have a culture, but part of the culture should be penalty. A penalty for negligence, etc. But unfortunately, it doesn't exist in the kind of way that we would want it to exist. So yes, the EIA is the Bible, but what we have said and what we have fought for at home here for longer than I want to remember is that the terms of reference, that is really the blueprint of what the EIA would capture, the terms of reference, and the terms of the procedure for the terms of reference is something that we had to fight for even in court, because we should be included in the procedure of how the terms of reference is created. Now, that is the blueprint. So a good TOR will give you a good EIA. It raises my pause because where we have failed miserably. So our Environmental Act, which we boast, is a modern, beautiful act. It's written on paper, and the paper can fool you to believe that you are safe, but it is in the enforcement of the paper. That is where we have been to court, unfortunately, almost as many times as I have years, because we have a designated activities order. These are the activities that require an EIA. But the designated activities order does not include seismic surveys. And if you read about the intensity of the sound of the seismic survey, you would see that the process by which you determine what requires an EIA is a critical component of good management. But
It does. Sorry, it's activity 24. They include seismic surveys, but our standard operating procedure doesn't mandate that all seismic
let's
surveys
see,
have to have an EIA.
so you could say that. So it is included in our designated activities order that seismic surveys require an EIA, but there's a technicality in the law that allows the environmental agency to determine which ones would require the EIA and which wouldn't. And none of that have been done so far in Trinidad have required an EIA. And what we have found is that it has a distinct impact, particularly on spawning species and migratory species, because it chases them away at the full speed that they can swim. In a study area that was done in Canada all the way back in 1994, for 50 kilometers away from the sound in a straight direction. So if the seismic survey is done here, and there's a pod or a school of spawning turtles, dolphins, whales, mackerel, king mackerel, they will run at full speed in a straight line away from the sound. What it means is that the species are scattered, but we have failed because in Trinidad, the energy companies don't want to face the science. And it's the same people that you have done. And we are not saying that we are against oil and gas. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But we are all for responsible oil and gas. Maybe their profits would be less 10% or 5% or 8%. But we have found in our experience that their green logos and their donations and their public aura does not reflect what they do on the ground. We have 52,000 men on the sea, and few of our men can afford a proper and decent wage or decent standard of living. We live in an extremely biodiverse part of the world where, if managed similarly to how the Canadian fisheries managed, where oil and gas coexist, we would be able to forge a living that is sustainable, to provide food that is safe and clean. Well, clean is another issue, but I wanted to comment about the critical importance of having policy. In Trinidad, we have a national environmental policy, which is a subject that we've been to court on numerous times because the policy has the force of law if enforced. But it's almost as though the elected officials are not elected by the people. It would break Walter Rodney's heart because it is exactly what he said in that quote that you posted earlier. It is really up to us, but we have copped out. I know that there are media, I'm looking at media here, and I don't mean any offense to anybody here, but we have to take responsibility for the fact that we are not publicly empowered to enforce or to ensure the enforcement of the laws and regulations that are on paper. So recently we had a flag of convenience, a vessel. As you may know, most of the ships that operate on planet Earth operate with flags of convenience, which all the way back in 1959, when there were only 24 members of the United Nations, 22 voted in favor of the removal of flags of convenience or a redefinition of flags of convenience so that they would at least be forced to abide by the laws and regulations, safety and labor laws of the home nation where the flag was registered. Today, 65 years later, it has never come back to the UN. There's never been a vote, and certain countries around the world have flourished by granting these flags. We argue that oftentimes a lot of the benefits that are paid in royalties from the extractive sector, more particularly, but also from the shipping sector, doesn't really end up in the treasury. It ends up in secret bank accounts that are protected. Shell companies. Shell companies, we have them in Ecuador, Antigua, Jamaica, St. Croix, US Virgin Islands, Bahamas, everywhere is cashing in on these private bank accounts that BP themselves were debated in the British Parliament, that they should not be paying monies into the private bank accounts of the Angolan Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, and Minister of Energy at a time when they were negotiating for their trades. 3 more minutes. So in the Tobago oil spill instance, we had a vessel flying a flag of convenience, which means that there are no labor laws, no environmental laws, no safety laws, nothing. They are invisible. And they abandon a ship that contains 225,000 barrels. They abandon it because it's listed. And the vessel that's pulling it just release it. So, of course, it runs ashore on the coral reef. My pause raised because we are eating that hydrocarbon. We have everything on paper. We have a national oil spill emergency plan. Nothing was put in place. Nobody in CARICOM was warned about it until 10 days later, when all of it had flowed, most of it had flowed into the Caribbean Sea. We are eating hydrocarbon. So there's a critical issue that arises. Why are we not enraged? Why is the common man not enraged? Why do we have this backward mentality of this insecurity about ethnicity, where our peoples are fighting each other on the political front line, rather than realizing that true nationalism goes beyond our heritage of where we came from. It has to deal with where we are now. And where we are now is that our planet is heating up at a frightening rate. 30% of our global populations exist on $1.50 US a day. A day. They can hardly buy shoes and clothes. And these people depend on ecosystems to wreak out a small and minuscule living. And we who are the privileged few are sitting back and thinking about our inheritance and who are we going to leave our wealth for and our own private corner of the field. Everybody is saying no. You know, they say that comparison is the thief of joy. Comparison is the thief of joy. So we want to compare ourselves to so many other people who are healthier, better looking, have happier children, more healthy environments. But we have to focus on who we are here today. If Guyana has a spill, just like all of their mercury from all of their rivers, it comes directly onto our water. And 70% of our Gulf of Paria water comes out from the Orinoco. It hugs the coast. Yet the EIA does not even address the risk to CARICOM, the risk to Trinidad. So Guyana is operating as if Guyana is at risk from offshore platforms. They are not at risk. The movement of the water does not flow onto Guyanese shores. So all of a sudden, where is the TOR for Guyana? Why hasn't the Trinidad government concerned? We have raised these issues numerably in writing and in person with our members of government. And what I'm saying to you is the sad reality is that I'm encouraged by the previous speaker because his presentation shows a level of proactivity to have risen to the pinnacles of his career and to have actually sat and influenced and interacted with EPA. We are not. We are limited to challenging these matters in the court. We have been to the Privy Council on 6 times. We have been to the High Court in Trinidad here 2 or 3 dozen times. And there are critical issues that boil down to the health of our people, to the economy of our poor, and to the critical responsibility we have as stewards to pass on something, at least in a comparable condition to how we received it. And to those three counts, sadly, I say, we have failed. We have not succeeded here in Trinidad. Thank you for the opportunity. I hope there's something I've said that would not be misrepresented. Thank you. Bless you all.
Thank you very much, Gary. Another very powerful speech, lots to think about. Two more speakers, and then we'll open up for Q&A and discussion. So our next speaker, Tushao Jeremy Boyal, in person here for us to counter the online people. So Tushao, Jeremy Boyal is Tushao of Warapoka Village in the Barima Waini. You can stay there. We'll bring you. Yeah. From Region 1, Barima Waini, which is an indigenous village. He will speak more about his experience. Region 1 is the part of Guyana that is in the direct line of fire when there's an oil spill, right? So we here in town, our life, for the most part, could go on. But for folks living in Region 1 especially, they are going to be very much affected. So invite Tushao Jeremy Boyal to share some words with you.
Not, yes.
Yes.
Okay. But I can't get him on the screen. This is what's going on. Oh, the camera's off.
All right. All right, so good morning. I think morning, no? To everybody. For those who don't know me, I see some people who I know here. But, yeah.
It's on.
Hello. Oh yeah, probably I'll put this close, huh? We probably could move this so I could. Is okay? Plus, like they built it too tall for me. That's right. Right. So again, Jeremy Boyle, Tusha Warapoka Village. We are closer to our brothers in Venezuela, and they love us so much that they want to take us over. Yeah. So my presentation will be basically what's been happening in terms of consultation and information we've been getting in the villages there. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to hear these two presenters. You could imagine we don't have all those information. And you as well in town, sometimes you might think you get the right information, but it might be, you know. So for us, the only, and it's been a discussion for us, if there's an oil spill, how we would be affected. And what's the presentation I'm hearing, it's very fearful, huh? As much as we talk about all the profit and development and, you know, all of the good, I really like as well the, what is it? Make friends with the environment or keep what?
Fishermen and friends.
No, something with the environment you said earlier that.
Oh, New World Environment Day.
World Environment Day, but you said something, keep peace with or make peace with the environment, no?
Yes.
I think in some cases we make peace, but in some places we maintain the peace. Huh? Like for I think the indigenous communities would be more like maintain the peace, I think. Because we have had from a recent research last year by a company named Upworld, Research and Environmental Studies and so on. Warapoka went from is the environment is very much intact. We have wildlife. We were able in a space of 6 weeks capture I think like 90% of all the species we have in Guyana. And it's just a small area, right? So it's very, we do tourism there as well. So if you're interested, we are the only village in Region 1 that do tourism, recognized as well. So you could call me, or we could talk after. They'll probably give you a discount, since you're here. Right, so Warapoka is approximately 90 miles from the mouth of the Waini River. But there are other communities that are close by, like Three Brothers, Embotero, Moruana. And the communities there, we survive off the natural resources. So people use water from the creeks, from the river. A lot of these villages, there's no running water, tap pipe. No, we still use pond, rain. So we are very much, with the environment here. So thinking about that, if, there's an oil spill, imagine, what would be the impact? It's like losing everything, right? And I think it's what we do as well as a village for Warpoka, and there's a lot of communities now talking about ecotourism. And the only product we have is the natural environment. So losing that is you losing everything as well. As well the culture, because of what we depend on to survive. For those who travel in the interior, you might understand that more. But it's part of our life. The Shell Beach protected area as well. I've been asking many times. We have consultation, but I would say that has not been on the agenda. It's always been, I think, the environmental assessment, and has always been focused on where the activity is happening out there. But it's never been, I don't think the villages, the coast has really been part of that EIA because for whatever reason. And so many times, sometimes we will try to, have what would be the effect? How are we playing a role if there's gonna be one? But again, that is not something that we as villages are aware. We just hear one side of the story, that there's so much production and there's so much millions that we're gonna earn in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And the rate of development plus, we are one of the fastest growing economy in the world. You could imagine if we just hear these types of information, the majority of the population don't have access to, what we're having here today. So it sounds bright and nice, yeah? The only type of consultation we have, again, like we said, is the EIA. For 2 to 3 hours, you would reach with the EPA and Exxon representative. Again, they would give us, 2 shows to raise questions, but most of these documents are in technical form. And like the 2 show and 2 other representatives might come. But some of these leaders are not, highly qualified to understand technical as well, all right, technical documents. So that would definitely be a problem. Then the time frame as well for the presentation is only like would be how would the drilling affect wildlife, within that area as well. There is always as well the idea and the message out there that oil spill, the possibility of that is almost 0. So don't worry about that. Yeah. And I'm hearing the probability times, is there. And so many times as well, we would hear stories and read stories, what happened in other countries. And the thing is that the few that understand, the danger as well with whatever we're doing, and then the few that speak out, then you will be picked at, yeah, by whoever think that you, and many times this is it. I find that there's a lot of time that when indigenous people speak, sometimes you're speaking because you're not qualified. So your ideas or your questions are not coming from a qualified perspective. So, I'm very honest, In terms of, again, come back to oil spill, there has been none or no. I think at one time, a couple of years back, some leaders were part of doing some sort of oil spill response, but as a one-off thing. But since after then, there was none, right? So I'm a bit concerned, because if there is when there is one, how do we respond? What do we do? Who compensate? Like I said, that information is, we don't know that. And so a lot of villages are very close to the Winey River as well. The water will be washing up and down, go up, we call wash, no, wash and fall, from the Winey River way up to Quamina, which is one of the farthest community in the Winey. We have Santa Rosa, which is the largest, Sharon from there, the largest Indian village there as well. And it's not, we would say it's far, no? So people say it's far down that way if you go, it's very far. For us, it's right there. Huh? So that's why sometimes you would hear when you go into Amerindian village, how far? Right down there, right? For us, it's very close, right? Because we know the area. And so I think with the little information that we have, and the stories even hearing as well many times, if there is an oil spill, right, and whatever negative effect is there that happen after, most of the time the people on the ground is the one that suffer the most. Yeah, the rich and the wealthy, like we hear the investors, they don't worry about running water, right? They would always have. The people on the ground is the one that suffers the most. We don't know, like I heard the last presenter there, we probably eating some of the stuff already, no? Coming into our system. So and my recommendation would be, and I'm making a recommendation because it's all I could do here, and probably we have other NGOs here who could help too. As a nation, as a country, I think we need to, for those who have the knowledge, who have the, resource as well, or could access resource, so somehow we need to get the public, especially the interior communities, give them the knowledge, because if you don't have the knowledge, how do you respond and ask questions? Yeah. So again, if you have any question though, you could ask me. You could call me 667-5339 if you want. If you want a tour as well. But I think many times as well, for those in Georgetown here, out there is very beautiful. Sometimes we take it for granted that, I heard somebody said the other day, it's hard for them to go into the area because there's no Wi-Fi. I was like, Wi-Fi? That shouldn't prevent you from going there. We have so much thing more beautiful and important than Wi-Fi. Yeah? Yeah. Yes, thanks.
Just one of these speakers, right? We could sit here all day. But we do have one final speaker, and that's Miss Melinda Janke. Again, familiar name, I think, to most of you. So Melinda Janke, Guyanese, international lawyer, winner of the 2023 Commonwealth Rule of Law. So Melinda, the floor is yours.
Wonderful. Good day, everybody. And thank you so much, Shalina, for arranging this. And also, I just want to say hats off to Shalina also for being plaintiffs in 2 of the cases. So as Shalina mentioned, I'm a lawyer. I also drafted the Environmental Protection Act and the Protected Areas Act, and I may talk about those very briefly a bit later on. I want to start though by saying to Xiao Boyal, I hear you, I hear what you say. Yes, your community is in danger and the community is in Region 1. And I'm ready to assist you and to show you how you can use what is there to protect your land, your people, your water, your wildlife. Because a lot of what is going on right now is illegal, and I've already written about the government's carbon capture scheme, which I have said is a deprivation of property, deprivation of Amerindian property. All I would say is it's quite hard to find two showers. So if you can just leave your number with Shalina or take my number from Shalina, we can be in touch. Now, so far I've filed 8 cases, and we've had one decision granting the unlimited parent company guarantee. I'm going to come back to that. Another court case in which we chopped Exxon's permits down from 25 years to 5 years. Another court case in which the judge said that the gas pipeline permit was illegal, and other cases that are going through the courts. But I'm a lawyer. I want to start with Lord Steyn in a case called the Crown against the Secretary of State, ex parte Daly, where Lord Steyn said, in law, context is everything. And we've heard a lot about the context already. So let me just briefly say what the context is for this. ExxonMobil have come to Guyana to make money. They didn't come here to make Guyana rich. They didn't come here to make the Guyanese people rich. In fact, the more that Exxon can exploit Guyana and the Guyanese people, the richer that they will be. They're not here to protect human rights. They're not here to protect the environment. In fact, their business model depends upon destroying the environment, because the oil industry, the products require you to burn oil and gas, and therefore to pollute the atmosphere with greenhouse gases, which causes global warming, which has many, many impacts, of which the breakdown of the global climate system is only one. I don't talk about climate change because we've gone way beyond that. And I don't talk about emissions, because we're not talking about emissions, we're talking about pollution. We're talking about an industry whose business model is to pollute the earth, the ocean, and the atmosphere until everything dies. There is no responsible way to do oil and gas. And when we think about the ocean, which is partly what we are here to talk about today, the greenhouse gas that dissolves in the ocean is making the ocean more acid, and global warming is making the ocean hotter, which means that marine life is not going to survive. We are already losing coral reefs. In addition to that, the way that this is done in Guyana, a lot of this, I think, is contrary to what is in the legislation. Let me just give you a couple of examples from LISA 1 as part of the context. The environmental impact assessment for LISA 1 says that Exxon can dump 4,000 barrels of sewage into the ocean every day. We don't know where this sewage is coming from, because there's only supposed to be about 200 people on the floating production storage offloading vessel. Over the life of the project, that's going to be 1.4 billion gallons of sewage dumped offshore Guyana. And you know, sewage isn't just going to sit there, it's going to come to the rest of the Caribbean. There's approximately 1.4 billion barrels of oil in that particular field, according to Exxon. So we would say that Guyana is going to get a gallon of sewage for every barrel of oil, which roughly sums up the deal that was signed. In addition to that, they're dumping ballast water, which has invasive alien species in it, produced water, which has pollutants in it, hazardous waste, which will be dealt with on land. They're raising the temperature of the water. There is noise pollution, which was already mentioned, and also light pollution, which affects birds. As and when there is an oil spill, just bear in mind that oil spill response plans and all the rest of it will only do a very little amount. The BP Macondo well blowout, which Dr. Adams said has now, the costs of now cleanup have now run into $150 billion. 75% of that oil is still in the Gulf. The oil does not go. They don't know how to take it out. What they do is they spray something called Corexit, which breaks up the oil, which means it sinks down. So in addition to being poisoned by the oil, marine life also has to contend with this pollutant called Corexit, which basically just hides the oil. Deep water drilling is dangerous, and therefore, as Dr. Adams said, safety is everything. You've basically got two choices. You either stop it, you either stop the oil, or you accept that you're putting Guyana and the Caribbean in danger, and therefore you try to do everything to make it as safe as possible. We know that's not happening. Dr. Adams told us that Exxon is operating above the safety limits, and we also know that they have been using faulty equipment because they have said so in court. And the approach that we have been taking in the court cases is to say, look, we have legal obligations in Guyana. We have national laws. And if this is the cost of you doing business, if you come to Guyana, you have to obey national law, ExxonMobil and Hess and CNOOC and everybody else who is there. But at the moment, the cases are basically ExxonMobil because they're the ones that are producing the oil. And if you are not prepared to obey the laws, then go home, because you can't do this in the United States. And whether you are pro-oil or anti-oil in Guyana, I think there is a national consensus among people in Guyana that ExxonMobil has got to obey the national laws. Now, we've seen from the maps that have been produced that if there is a well blowout, the oil could reach as far as Jamaica. Wake up, Caribbean, wake up. This map has been around for some years now. It only shows what happens after 30 days. It took BP 89 days to cap the Macondo well. 89 days, that's nearly 3 times as long as this map from Exxon shows the spill. So they're showing you after 30 days. What's it gonna look like if it takes 89 days to clean up that mess? And Dr. Adams is absolutely right when he talks about risk and probability, because the bigger the impact, the less you should be willing to take that chance. I've told you about Liza 1 briefly. Liza 2 and Payara, which are also producing, are bigger, therefore the impacts are that much bigger, and they are also producing above the safety limits. Now, before you do oil in Guyana, you must carry out an environmental impact assessment. And I hear the complaints about public participation, but the legislation does actually provide for public participation. And indeed, in the case of Collins and White against Exxon and the EPA, the judge said the entire scheme of legislation in the Environmental Protection Act is built on the cornerstones of transparency, inclusivity, public interest, public participation, and complete disclosure. So it's not enough to just say nobody is telling us. You actually have to go and tell the EPA what you want. If you want them to communicate with you, you have to tell them, and you have to force them to do their job, because they're not doing it. I mean, for example, they're supposed to put public advertisements in the national press so that people at least can see, if they read the papers, what's happening. Well, they put it in the Guyana Chronicle, which hardly anybody reads because it's noted for being unduly influenced by the government, so people are not getting the information. And so I think a first stage, because I like the idea, to Shelboy, I like the idea of recommendations very much. And so I think we should come up with a list of things that your community wants the EPA to do, and we just demand that that is what they do. So when I say the EPA are not doing their job, don't just take my assessment for it. You've already heard from the court decisions, clearly things have not been done well. But in addition, Justice Gissoon said in his decision, the same Collins and White decision, he said the EPA has relegated itself to a state of laxity of enforcement and condemnation, compounded by a lack of vigilance, therefore putting this nation, Guyana, and its people in grave potential danger of calamitous disaster. Now, we know that. We know they're not doing their job. We know that there is a grave potential danger, calamitous disaster. So it's no good saying that what they ought to do and complaining because they're not doing it. What we have to do is to make them do their job and make the government do its job. That's called enforcing the rule of law. And in fact, the judge quotes from Justice Bhagwati in India, and he says that, but for the vigilance of citizens, society shall perish. But there is also a constitution imperative, because Article 25 of the Constitution says every citizen has a duty to participate in activities designed to improve the environment and protect the health of the nation, and that must surely include ensuring that the Environmental Protection Agency does its job and makes sure that those environmental impact assessments take place, make sure that there is public participation, and if there isn't public participation, go and make sure that they hear what you say, or go to court if you're not satisfied. We have to rely now on the judges, because the Environmental Protection Agency has not been doing its job. I know that there are problems because we are encountering delays in the judicial system, and as everybody here knows, justice delayed is justice denied. We had it in one case where the Chief Justice took 1 year to make a decision. In another case, she took 17.5 months to make a decision. Now we have national legislation which says judges must not take more than 120 days. So I'm not going to pretend that everything is good. It's not. There are problems throughout the systems, but you still have to use the system, and you still have to demand that it works, because if you don't demand that it works, nothing will change. One of the things that we have had to face up to is the failure of the EPA to enforce, for example, the permits. So in the LISA 1 permit, it says that the permit holder, ESSO, I'm going to call them ExxonMobil because they changed their name to ExxonMobil Guyana. So ExxonMobil Guyana is liable for all costs associated with cleanup, restoration, and compensation for any damage caused by the discharge of any contaminant into the sea, and obviously that includes greenhouse gas, that includes oil, etc. And therefore, they were required to provide a parent company guarantee to indemnify the government of Guyana and the Environmental Protection Agency under the environmental permit. So they're supposed to produce this this unlimited parent company guarantee and insurance. Now, in the case, the judge made a series of declarations where he basically said the EPA was in breach of its statutory obligations, so they're not doing their job. He said that ESSO was in breach of its permit, so they're not doing what they're supposed to do. And he ordered the EPA, the judge ordered the EPA to get ExxonMobil in Guyana to provide an unlimited guarantee from its parent or an affiliate. The parent company obviously is ExxonMobil Corporation, to provide this unlimited liability parent company guarantee to indemnify the government of Guyana, and I'll come back later to why that's important, and to indemnify the Environmental Protection Agency against all the environmental obligations, and environmental liability insurance as is customary in the international petroleum industry. Sorry, did somebody interrupt? No, thought I heard somebody asking a question. Now, the Environmental Protection Agency appealed against that decision, even though it's a decision which protects the Environmental Protection Agency, because it says that Exxon will indemnify the Environmental Protection Agency. So the Exxon has appealed and the EPA has appealed, and the Attorney General has applied to join the case in order to argue that there shouldn't be an unlimited parent company guarantee in favor of the government of Guyana. So the decision protects the government of Guyana, and the Attorney General is objecting to that decision, and he was recently allowed to join the case. Now, while this has been going on, the appeal has not yet been heard. We're waiting. But in the meantime, the EPA and ESSO, ExxonMobil Guyana, applied to have a stay of the decision, which means that the decision, put crudely, is suspended, so you don't have to comply with it at that moment. The declarations, they remain as declarations of law, so they don't change. But a single judge in the Court of Appeal heard the application for the stay. This is His Honour Justice Rishi Prasad, and he granted the stay on the unlimited parent company guarantee, so they don't need to produce the unlimited parent company guarantee, and he granted a stay of the insurance. So there's no obligation on them now to produce any insurance. And he said that as a condition of this, he was going to order them to produce a guarantee of $2 billion. Now, in the last bit of his decision, he says at paragraph 21, in an effort to allay any anxiety as to impending doom, as conceived by some. Impending doom as conceived by some. I want you to think about that, because you've heard from Dr. Adams about risk and about the magnitude of the impacts that can happen from a spill. Macondo well blowout, 4.9 million barrels of oil, 4.9 million barrels of oil, covered across the Gulf, devastated the Gulf. And yet we have here to allay anxiety as to impending doom. I don't know how people feel about whether a $2 billion guarantee actually allays anybody's anxiety about impending doom, particularly when you know that Macondo now, the costs are up to 150 billion US dollars. When you know, and this we put in the court, that Guyana's biggest ever budget last year was $3 billion. So we have a lot of work to do here, I think, to enable the judiciary in Guyana to understand what is really going on with the oil and gas industry as an industry, the risks that it poses, and the risks that it poses not just to the environment, but to the economy of Guyana and the surrounding states, because a great deal of Caribbean wealth is tied up in things that are related to the ocean. A great deal of Caribbean livelihoods are tied up in things that are related to the ocean. And so you have these impacts, and Guyana is going to be liable for these impacts, not just because there is no longer the parent company guarantee in place, but also because under international law, Guyana is liable, and Guyana is in breach of international law. And there may have been some doubt of this until last week, and congratulations to Antigua and Barbuda and Vanuatu for going to the International Tribunal on the Law of the Sea and getting an advisory opinion on states' duties. And what I would like to do, because this decision goes on for 150 something pages, what I would like to do is to just give you very briefly the main points, the key points. And there are 5 or 6 of these. One, the tribunal, and this is international law, they say that states have an obligation to protect and preserve the marine environment from climate change impacts and ocean acidification. I actually think they should have said global warming rather than climate change, but everybody talks about climate change, although that is the fossil fuel industry narrative, when really they should be talking about global warming and ocean acidification. The second thing the court says is that this is an obligation of due diligence, and that it is a stringent obligation because of the high risks of serious and irreversible harm to the marine environment. Now, due diligence is a concept in international law. It is an obligation. And in this case, Guyana is failing because when you have, for example, environmental protection legislation, which is not being followed, clearly you're not carrying out due diligence. And we know it's not being followed. Dr. Adams again gave a very good example, which was the refusal to require an environmental impact assessment for the gas plant. And in my view, that decision was completely illegal, and I wrote to the EPA and I told them that. And that would have made a very good case. The other thing that the convention has said is states have the obligation to protect and preserve rare or fragile ecosystems and threatened or endangered species. We have endangered species in our waters. We have cetaceans. We have, including sperm whales. Our ocean has the most amazing, beautiful, wonderful marine life. Marine life and oil and gas drilling are incompatible. You heard already about the impacts of the noise, but not only does it scatter fish, seismic blasting makes whales deaf. Their eardrums burst, they bleed. Seismic testing can kill them. So it's much, much worse than people realize. And Guyana needs to be doing its due diligence, and it needs to be taking steps to protect these endangered species. We also have endangered turtles. Now, you have to take into account, ITLOS says, the best available science and relevant environmental and economic factors. Now, those things are already set out in national law. You have to take into account the impacts of everything that of what you're doing if your project reaches the threshold for an EIA. And that means that everything is treated as a contaminant that has to be assessed. And that includes the obvious things, solids, liquids, gases, smells, etc. But it also includes temperature, vibrations, radiation, and sound. So all of these environmental impact assessments should be talking about sound, and there should be environmental impact assessments for exploration, not just for production of oil. The legislation also requires that when you get your environmental permit, you have to use the best available technology. And that also, oh my goodness. Sorry, I think I'm running out of time. I think that's what that was. So I'm going to close off by saying that Guyana, in my view, is in breach of international law, that Guyana is in breach, that the EPA is not enforcing the Environmental Protection Act, and citizens will need to make sure that that is done. And I just want to mention briefly the Constitution, which says that the well-being of the nation depends on clean air, clean water, fertile soils, and a rich biodiversity of plants, animals, and ecosystems. And incidentally, I wrote that article in the Constitution. And we have a right to a healthy environment, which I lobbied for, and which is in Article 149J. I'm going to close there. Thank you very much, everybody. I'm sorry that that was such a gallop, but I think it was the only way to get it through. Do get in touch with me if you've got any questions or you'd like any advice.
Questions. Right. So I hate to interrupt any of these speakers because they're so knowledgeable and there's so much good information that we need. But as part of the groundings, it's meant to be interactive. So I did, and you know, I often go to events and there's never enough time for questions, right? So we wanted to, part of why we're asking them to cut short is so that you all here and people online have a chance to engage with them and with each other to ask questions. So the floor is now open to anyone.
Can I call you back, Leslie?
A question?
Okay, I'm in the backyard. Oh, okay. I'm still in this webinar.
Yes, Gary, we can hear you. So if anyone in the room has a question, and now is your chance, raise your hand. The Romola, there's a hand here. So she can come around to you. So this is for the panelists as well as, you know, in the room if you choose first. Okay.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Davina Bagat, and I'm a reporter from. Okay. Can you hear me now? Yes. I'm Davina Bagat. I'm a cultural news journalist. My question is for Ms. Janke. Could you please give your thoughts on the US $2 billion oil spill guarantee that has been submitted by the Stavropol partners? One lawyer has told me that it is not sufficient, and even if
I'm sorry, I can't actually hear the question.
can you hear me any clearer now?
No. I think you'll have to holler.
Is the computer aligned to the Zoom window here? Right. But it's
Hi, Ms. Jen. Can you hear me? No?
Yeah, that's a bit better, but there's an echo.
But you all are not going to hear.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, just holler.
Okay, sure. There's a
I
All
can't
right,
hear you.
can you give us your thoughts on the US 2 billion oil spill guarantee that has been submitted by the Stafford Block partners? I was saying earlier that in my interactions with a lawyer here, he was saying that the amount is first of all insufficient, and second of all, if we try to access it based on the terms in there, it might take us a very long time, maybe years in the courts for us to try and access that money. Based on your analysis of the document submitted, can you give us your thoughts on it, whether, I mean, is it good enough based on the risk posed to us? And does it offer any sort of compensation to our Caribbean neighbors? Because I know Mr. Aboud mentioned the types of impacts that they can face as well. So can you speak to that, please? Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think that's an excellent question. Unfortunately, there is no evidence before the court that ESSO has complied with the requirement to provide a $2 billion guarantee. So I can't comment on any guarantee that may or may not be circulating in the public domain or that has been published in the official gazette, because there is no evidence in front of the court that this is the guarantee that is supposed to be provided in compliance with the order. In terms of whether the sum of $2 billion is sufficient, clearly, if you could have a potential liability of 150 billion US dollars, which is Macondo, or AIFA has also produced a report saying that the Caribbean economies are worth over 100 billion and they would be affected, then I think it's a matter for everybody to sit back and think, well, really, is a guarantee of $2 billion really commensurate with what is a possibility, what is a risk, and that risk is increasing every day that those operations take place above the limits set by the environmental impact assessment, and every day that there is any use of faulty equipment. So I would leave that question with the public. What I would say is that everybody should read the decision by Justice Kissoon, and he said that any attempt to substitute a diluted guarantee constitutes a breach of the conditions of the permit. So that's the decision, and it stands unless it is changed by the Court of Appeal. And we are waiting for the Court of Appeal to hear that appeal, and we just have to wait until that happens.
Could I jump in here
Please.
too?
Please do.
Let's put this into context here as to what's going on. And I keep saying it, not only is it $2 billion ridiculous, it should not even be a point of discussion. Let me put it into context, how things evolved. When I was at EPA again, and they brought Lisa 1 was already signed off with what it said was self-insurance. Well, folks, please understand, Exxon's name is not on any document. What Exxon did, like many other companies do, they go and they form these limited liability child companies or subsidiaries who would insulate them from any liability. So we've got EMGL that has no assets at the time to sign to say that they're going to cover the liabilities. Well, if something happens, Exxon is protected because they're not signing any document. It is EMGL that is signing all the documents. So what we told them is that you cannot cover any liabilities if a spill occur. And so they asked us what we want. I said, you must have a parent company guarantee, which means that Exxon has to sign off. Exxon and the other two companies, Sunup and Hess. We were working on that guarantee, which was between the three of them to decide how they're going to cover, how they're going to share that liability if something occurred. We were at the final draft of that document, not the document with us. They had already agreed to it because they signed the permit they'd already committed to it, which is the EMGL, that it will be unlimited. What's so difficult or unreasonable to tell Exxon, well, not Exxon, EMGL, who was representing Exxon, to say, okay, you're going to be making hundreds of billions of dollars. If something happens, you have to cover the liability, the cleanup, etc. That was is as reasonable as any as you can get. They agreed to it. The only thing that was left is for them to sign that letter among the three of them as to how they're going to cover that guarantee. We were in August of 2020 when the government changed. We were the final draft of that document because what we told them, we will not sign any other permits for you to operate the Payara or anything else. And when the Lisa one comes for renewal, we will not sign off on that. So they were hurrying to get the document. In August of 2020, we were the final draft of the document, the parent company guarantee. When, of course, I was removed, the lawyer, the EPA lawyer who was working, he was removed. They dumped all of that aside, all of the letter of guarantee and everything else, and then and they added a clause. They added a clause into the permit after they got rid of that. They added a clause into the permit that says that they will determine what that parent company guarantee is, which caused a lot of confusion because they did not remove the clause that we had that says it has to be unlimited, but they added a clause on top of that that says they will determine what that parent company guarantee is. So that was what Judge Kissoon looked at and ruled against and said that's you cannot, that will not be considered. You have to go with the unlimited parent company guarantee. The presumptuousness of this government. Do you know, even after Judge Kissoon made that ruling, they went and negotiated with Exxon for a $2 billion parent company guarantee. So that's where that $2 billion parent company guarantee has come from, even after Judge Kissoon's ruling. So we should not even entertain any $2 billion for discussion. It is about unlimited parent company guarantee, and it's a reasonable request for them to be coming and making hundreds of billions and say, if something happens, you will cover the cost. They do not want to do that, and that's where we are. Put it in writing. That was what we told them. When they said, the other thing that we hear is that, oh, we were Exxon, of course we will not walk. Well, you're not Exxon, you are EMGL. Exxon name is not in anything. They will never walk away. We'll put it in writing that Exxon will not walk away and they will cover their responsibility. That's all we're asking. So this whole $2 billion, we should not even be entertaining it for any discussion. It is about whatever it costs, which is what the permit says, any and all costs, whatever it costs, you have to cover it. It's a reasonable request, and that's all that we should be discussing. Don't let us discuss this ridiculous $2 billion. Here's the other thing. The vice president and Exxon keeps telling folks, well, we could seize the assets of EMGL. Folks, EMGL has no assets. All of the assets of EMGL belongs to the government of Guyana. We are paying for it in cost oil. So it's foolish for us to be saying we're going to seize our own assets to pay for costs.
Thank you, Dr. Adams. I see several other hands. Laura, gentleman up there, then Amanda.
Yes, I'll come back to you.
Thank you very much. We hardly met of the panel.
Sorry.
Okay. So, Ms. Janke, I'm Laura George from the Aboriginal People's Association. And the reason that I have been following a bit of the court decisions in the press is because in trying to understand the magnitude of oil and gas extraction, its impacts on the environment, marine life, global warming, discussions that Guyana participates in at the United Nations level, and what it means for Indigenous peoples and Indigenous people's rights. I would like to make a request or a recommendation. I don't know who's going to lead on this. Is it the Green Heart Movement? Is it Ms. Janke's office or civil society group? I don't know. But Boyle spoke about the need for understanding what oil and gas and its impacts and everything is. And Ms. Janke's recommendation to us was to go and read the decisions of the judges. We have tried it with one case that we've been dealing with in trying to understand the judge's decision, which is always very confusing. So my recommendation is for probably a summary of the decisions that the man on the street, the woman on the street can understand, because we need to come together on this and what might it mean and lead to perhaps a constitutional motion, because it's graphic, and the expanse of the impact on the environment, the non what do you call it, adherence to the act and implementation, the absence of proper decision making and lack of inclusion of the citizens of Guyana. I think all of these boils down to this violation of rights of the citizens of Guyana. I believe that the decisions will also lead to empowerment of the citizens, understanding exactly what opportunities the decisions have provided for the citizens to further hold the state accountable. We say that Guyana is in breach of international laws. We need to understand what the international laws are. And in reference to the Antigua and Barbuda decision there, there's a precedent that Guyanese also need to understand, so that we push on holding on accountability. So those are just some recommendations that I wanted to make. And as I said, I don't know who's going to do it, but I believe that we are ready to support the whole movement for rights protections of Guyanese citizens and the environment and marine life.
Okay, so if I could just respond on.
I'll take the other questions and then we can have answers.
Okay. I thought Laura was asking me specifically, but that's okay.
Yes. So just because time is short, and I do want to say, and then that red thread, the other co-sponsor of this event, is embarking on specifically that a campaign to translate the decisions of the courts on these cases into language and materials for the general public. And they actually have a PSA that they've created, which is available on their Facebook page. And if we have time, we can show it here as well. So, question.
I am Joe Prasad. I live in Toronto for past 52 years. But I've been in and out of Guyana because Dr. Jacob had borrowed me as the Director of Primary Education here for 3 years, 94 to 97. I'm a consulting engineer and planner, and I saw in Trinidad in the 1970 oil boom, all the things that happened not only environmentally, in the entire effect of money coming in. Now, my question is, it's a wonderful lecture, and I must commend everyone on what we heard. But my question is that people would like to know, when the oil spills, how do you collect it? And what do you do with it?
Okay, thanks for that question. I'll take two more from the floor.
Good morning, everyone. Can they hear me? Yeah, good morning, everyone. My name is Antonio Day. I'm from HEP Nightly News. I'm a reporter. I have a question to Dr. Janki. Well, in fact, a statement rather. The Vice President last week, Friday, at his press conference, announced that there would be a draft legislation in place, which means it's possibility that is going to address some of the factors as it relates to mitigating the likeliness of an oil spill. I would like to know, do you see this as a major step for Guyana, considering the fact that we are already ahead in terms of oil and gas production, respectively, Liza 1 and Liza 2? That's my question.
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
Melinda is saying she doesn't understand the question. You're asking maybe one more time.
Should I speak
What is
more?
the question?
Okay, my question is, in light of the draft legislation, which is supposed to be released soon, according to the Vice President, Do you see this as
About what? What is the draft legislation about? Sorry, I haven't seen it.
the draft legislation on oil spills, the oil spill legislation? According to the vice president, it is likely to address the factors as mitigating on a spill. So I want to know, since we have gone ahead in terms of production as it relates to LISA 1, LISA 2, and Cara, do you see this as a major step for Guyana?
Okay, one more question. Okay, two more questions.
Just to speak in.
Yes.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Greenheart, Shirley, and Red Thread for this excellent forum. I loved what all of the 4 panelists said, brilliant. And my comment and question is to Tushao Boyal. So, Tushao, would you say that free, prior, and informed consent, which is part of our Constitution and part of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, which is now part of our Constitution as well, would you say that FPIC was fully complied with in any of the meetings that your people and your communities in Region 1 held with ExxonMobil? I have been to 1 or 2 of those, and I will just share with the people here, these people, citizens of Guyana, that what usually happens is ExxonMobil speaks, and then the EPA and the government speaks for an hour, and then they give 20 minutes, if you're lucky, for people, especially community people, to then ask questions. It's an absurdity. Free, prior, and informed consent is essential for any discussion and for any decision by Indigenous peoples on any of their rights and their privileges and their resources. Thank you.
Thanks, Vanda.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Fred.
Wonderful. Now, I want to go back to Sharina's opening when she said the context in which the world finds itself in Gaza. I think very relevant, because what we are seeing is the criminal nature of the capitalist instinct for profit, which has been touched upon. And that group, that thinking has had hundreds of years to perfect the art of division and rule. Gary spoke about, he touched upon the ordinary man's concern with ethnicity, etc., etc. This is a problem we have, at least from Trinidad, we know we have the same problem here. The question I'm asking is, in that context, somebody touched upon where you said context is everything. The question I'm going to ask is, how do we get, because that is the problem we have, how do we get the ordinary man, the average man, to become politics proof, to become politics proof, so that people can understand that the interest of the nation, the Caribbean nation, the interest transcend his peculiar interest in this or that job. This thing is, when you talk about the 2 billion and you're talking about, you touched on it, the meeting touched on it, where it seems as though we have another boss. There is a force that is controlling. We only think that we have some form of democracy. And I'm asking the question in light of one thing. Let me finish off with this. Many people might not be old enough to know, this is why I said the context in which you mentioned, the historical context is so important, about the Bhopal disaster. The Union Carbide, after that catastrophe, made sure they gave the people as little as possible. This is the culture in which we find ourselves. So this is not a theoretical issue.
Yes, Vanda Razik and Fred Collins. So I want to say we don't have a lot of time here, and I see somebody online has a question as well. But we are going to continue this today. So after lunch, we are actually from 12 to 1, Red Thread has a picket outside the office of the president, which happens the first Wednesday of every month. So after this, we're going directly there. So you're welcome to come to that and keep the questions and the conversation going. And then at 2, we're going to be in front of Stabrook Market by the police outpost across the Semico doing a skit, a bit of public theater. So we're taking this out of here into the streets, and there's lots of room for further engagement with each other and with other venues. And we also have a letter drafted, which lets to the papers about the Kissoon ruling and the oil spill legislation. And we're asking for people to sign on to that letter if they're willing publicly. And then we will send it to the newspaper for them to be printed. So the letter, we can circulate it for you to read. But I did want the questioners to try to get their questions answered.
One person.
Okay.
Can I answer? Because I have another meeting that I have to go to promptly at noon. So if I could just respond to the people who asked me questions, if we could just take the letter off for the moment, and then I can respond, and then you could go ahead with this bit, because I won't be a part of this.
Go ahead, Melinda.
Yeah, can we take the letter down so I can see the audience?
Yes. You can go ahead while I figure out how to do that. Go ahead.
Okay, so there was a lot of very rich material there in what people had asked and some of the comments. Rather than address everything line by line, I think what I want to do is to give you some principles to guide you in the future. One of which is that when it comes to law, then the only people who are actually going to be able to say something sensible are lawyers in private practice, who are actually going to court or actually engaged with law as what they do. Do not go to lawyers who work for NGOs. They're not in private practice. They don't know enough. And try, when you go to lawyers in private practice, go to the ones who are experts. So for example, you wouldn't come to me and ask me anything about criminal law. That's not my area of law. You wouldn't come and ask me anything about family. I don't know anything about family law. But if you want to do administrative law, if you want to know about oil and gas, because I worked in the oil industry as well, incidentally, I should have said that up front. Go to the lawyers who are experts in the area in which you want to get advice. Don't go to NGOs for legal advice. It's a disaster. Don't go to academics for legal advice. It's a disaster. Coming back to the question of the decisions, what I actually said was I would advise everybody to read Justice Kissoon's decision. I would not be telling people to read judgments in general, because they're written in very difficult language, and you need to know quite a lot about legal concepts before you can read and understand a decision. The thing about Justice Kissoon's decision is it's written in very plain English, it's beautifully written, and it's a joy to read, and it's very easy to understand. So I think this decision from Justice Kissoon stands out, and it's one of the very, very rare occasions on which I would say to somebody to read a legal decision. Now, coming back to some of the questions, the Environmental Protection Act is there, you have to use it. It's no point saying, oh, this isn't here or this isn't there. It's there in the act, you have to become familiar with it and you have to use it. And I get really concerned when people start talking about their rights being breached and they don't even know what's in the legislation. So you need to find out what's in that legislation and you need to use it before you start worrying about what might or might not be there, because you don't know. The fact you don't know what's there doesn't mean it isn't there. So you have to learn how to use what's there in order to get what you want, in order to protect your rights. Because remember, the oil companies are not here to protect your rights. Coming back to free, prior, informed consent, where you own something, so where you own your land, whatever, free, prior, informed consent is irrelevant, because you have control, and control is 1,000,000 times, 1,000,000,000,000 times better than FPIC. So where you own your land, you can say no, you don't have to give your consent to anybody, you don't have to listen to them, you don't have to do anything. I mean, even right now, the legislation provides that nobody is supposed to enter Amerindian land without the consent of the village council, that no one can take anything out without the consent of the village council. So what we have in there is a system to ensure that you don't even have to talk to people if you don't want to or listen to them. But you do have absolutely the right to determine whether you'll say yes and what conditions you want. Because FPIC is actually about getting you to say yes for nothing. And it is, I know people like it a lot. We can do a whole session on FPIC, but I would caution you on it. And with ExxonMobil, they're not coming to ask your consent to anything. They get consent from the government. And the way you get involved is through the environmental impact assessments. It's through what you own. It's through all of the other laws that protect you. But it's not going to be from them coming to talk to you. They are supposed to consult people, and if you feel you haven't been properly consulted, then there are rules that protect you so that the consultation is not treated as valid. But it's already there.
Yes. So that question was actually directed to Tushar Boyal. So I'm going to give him the mic and ask him.
Yeah, I'm going to drop off because I have to go to my other meeting. Thank you very much, everybody. I've left my email in the chat. I'm perfectly aware that some of what I say is not going to make people very happy, but we just have to deal with life as it is and deal with the law as it is and use it because it's there to be used. Thank you very much, everybody. Bye-bye.
All right, so yeah, specifically for the oil and gas consultation we had, I think it's said by a lot of leaders coming to meetings with consultation. You would hear they say, we're going to listen to them. Yeah, because I think all of us have drawn the conclusion that you come into this discussion, to this consultation, and it doesn't matter what you say, the project just move on. All right, so you as well put your signature of attendance on that sheet, and maybe your attendance there just show that you were part of that discussion. So in terms of FPIC, in my opinion, that is not there because it is not, whatever comment is taken on board in the document as well, but I think it doesn't delay or in any way, if you say no, it doesn't, affect whatever the activity they have planned to move ahead. Yeah, so in terms of having information beforehand, we have raised it as well. At one point, they did provide a document like this thickness about 2 weeks before, very technical as well. So I wouldn't call it yeah.
Thanks. Alyssa, I'm sorry, I'm not going to get to your question because we just need to wrap up here, unfortunately, and get to the pickets. Wish you were here. But before we do that, before we all leave, I want to invite Mayu Ramsey, who is a youth member of Red Thread, to close us out with a poem that she. Thank you.
The next poem is what I got to say. With everything that is happening since we get oil and gas, I have a few things that I must start fast. We grassroots people don't know who to trust. It is very clear our government don't care about us. It seems like it's only poor people got something to say when it comes to high cost of living and minimum pay. It looks like it's only the bright people deserve to understand this whole thing about oil and gas and its great demand. People with children will always shut them out because either they're scared or glad for the government handles. It seems like it's only poor single mothers knows how to cry because the cost to feed the children gone up sky high. The fishermen at sea must be feeling it for sure because they know exactly why the fishes are no more. But people believe that they ain't bright, so nobody wants to hear. this oil and gas thing could affect everyone, everywhere. Yes, some people getting rich with all this oil money, but in later days, it won't all be milk and honey. When these oil companies come to do what they want with our thing, it's only promises and mostly destruction they will bring. It is very clear when you figure it out in the end, these oil companies are never our friend. They act like they care, but they just pretend. They are bullies and lawbreakers, is what I have to say. Because I know what it feels like every day. It's like you're stuck between a rock and a stone, and I know I'm not speaking for myself alone. Thank you.
So thank you very much. Sorry, we have to wrap up. There is a sign-in sheet at the back. Again, if you want to stay connected, please leave your email, contact information. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram. Green Heart Movement is the name. Red Thread is the other organization name. Again, we're picketing outside Office of the President from 12 to 1 as soon as we get there. And then we will be in front of the police outpost in Starbuck Market from 2 with our skits. Please join us. And thanks again for being here and for your kind attention.
Thank you.